amazed how little attention the media has given to a new report on global warming I mentioned last week. I'm not that surprised, to be honest. I mean, I've seen how the media ignores proof that the warming scare is grossly exaggerated. But I think you deserve to know more about this report. In the United States, Chris Wright, who's the brilliant gas tycoon who now leads the US Department of Energy, he hired 5 very prominent climate experts to report back to the government on what the climate was really doing and whether we could trust predictions by the most popular climate models that we're facing dangerous warming of at least 3 degrees this century and we're already copping all sorts of climate disasters. Well, the author's conclusion was that the climate models are actually unreliable. They're all over the shop. They predict probably 1 degree more warming than is likely, and we aren't getting many of the predicted climate disasters. Plus, global warming also has benefits that are often ignored, especially a big increase in trees and crops that we've been seeing, a greening of the planet. And in this report, the authors sum it all up like this. Models, the climate models, and experience suggest that carbon dioxide-induced warming may be less damaging economically than commonly believed. And excessively aggressive mitigation policies, you might include our own net zero schemes, could prove more detrimental than beneficial. So you can understand why the authors have since been absolutely trashed for daring to doubt the climate scare and upsetting the climate industry. They've been called all sorts of names, painted as fools, frauds, Donald Trump toadies, even Stalinists, would you believe? But don't be fooled by the abuse, because the 5 authors are in fact very prominent experts. Professor Emerita Judith Curry, who's published 192 peer-reviewed papers on the climate. Dr. Roy Spencer, NASA senior scientist who runs probably the most accurate measure of world temperature. Professor Ross McKittrick, an expert reviewer of the last 3 reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And distinguished Professor John Christie, a former lead author of an IPCC report. I mean, these are very serious people. Plus, Stephen Koonin is a physicist and former Undersecretary for Science for President Barack Obama, a Democrat. And I am joined by Stephen Koonin. Steve Koonin, thank you so much for your time. Why did you and the other 4 experts behind this report actually agree to do it when you must have known the climate industry and the media, they would really go for you?
Indeed. But, we are all 5 of us scientists who have long felt that the science was misrepresented to the public and the decision makers. And we wanted to do our best to set the record straight.
Well, your report agrees on many points with what I'll call the consensus, the alarmist position perhaps, the position of the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You say, yes, global warming is real, yes, it's a problem, yes, it's caused in part by humans. Now tell us where you disagree with this consensus.
Well, 95% of our report, people have said, agrees with or is taken right out of the IPCC. It's just that there are aspects of what the consensus says that do not find their way to the public. For example, there are no detectable trends in the great majority of extreme weather types. The models that we use to project climates into the future are demonstrably deficient. They're in many ways all over the place in terms of what they project. And the projected impacts of future climate change, even using those deficient models, are minimal. And these are very important central points that are there in the report, but do not make their way to the public discussion.
You actually point out that the models tend to run hot, as in predict more warming than we've had. They're unreliable. A number are basing on false assumptions of how much emissions we're going to get. You actually predict almost the 1 degree less warming over the century than the IPCC model consensus. How important is that?
Well, to be clear, we don't predict. We simply cite and assess the work of others. But certainly if the warming is a degree less than what the IPCC consensus says, that's a big deal.
And what about the climate disasters? I mean, every time, we've got it right now, we've got some algae blooming off the South Australian coast. Global warming, we get heavy rain, global warming, we get a drought, global warming. How much influence has man-made warming really had from the work that you've done in this report? How much has it really influenced the natural disasters we tend to see?
Yeah, we have a very short memory for weather disasters. There's a lovely example we turned up having to do with the floods in Texas that we saw at the beginning of July that were a terrible tragedy. But if you look back in the records, you can find the same kind of event happening in the same place in 1900. And of course, human influences on the climate were much smaller in 1900. And so you have a very hard time logically attributing the recent disaster to carbon dioxide. The same is true for many other severe weather phenomena. They happen in the past. They're just relatively rare, and so we get surprised when we see them happen in the present day.
Yeah, I noticed, for instance, in your report, you say the number of heat waves in America actually peaked nearly 100 years ago, the number of heat waves that was striking America at the time, and what we see now, all right, is much less.
The damning thing about the heat waves is that we really don't understand why the 30s was so much warmer than it was in many subsequent decades. And that speaks to our rather poor understanding of the way in which the climate varies.
Now, your report, I think what the real thing that's annoying so many people in the climate industry is this. You say the warming will be less than what most people are claiming. You say the disasters from the warming we've seen are basically exaggerated. They're not that many that you can point to. And the attempts we make to stop all this are very expensive. And, well, do they really work? The takeout here, isn't it, that it might not actually be worth trying to stop what isn't the disaster, the climate disaster that many claim.
Absolutely. In deciding what to do, we have to balance the hazards, the certainties and uncertainties in the changing climate against other considerations, like the world needs more and more energy. And deciding what to do, you have to look at the costs. Are they going to be effective? What about equity between generations, between countries, and so on? It's not simply that, oh my God, we've broken the climate and we've got to fix it. And I think people get annoyed when we start to expose those nuances of the situation.
Oh, yes. You've really offended in church. And of course, you also stress what's undeniably true. The greening of the planet is actually a benefit of extra carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. More trees, more plants, more food.
Agricultural yields have in fact doubled over the last 60 years or so. And a good fraction of that, NASA says 75%, is attributable to higher carbon dioxide levels. If you look inside a hothouse, we put the carbon dioxide levels typically up to about 1,200 parts per million, which is just about 3 times what you find in the atmosphere even now.
Now, you've come under massive attack, of course, Steve Koonin. I mean, environmental groups are even suing to censor the report. You've got media outlets of the left demonising you, running so-called fact checks. I've had a look at a few and they're not persuasive. Some climate scientists are abusing you, claiming, the group of you are just hand-picked skeptics, even though you used to be with the Obama administration. Have there been any criticisms of your report that you think, yep, that's fair enough, we've goofed here, or we haven't taken this into consideration? Any criticism you think you should take on the chin?
Well, we've seen one already that, we made basically a typographical error in one of the footnotes. And we have acknowledged that to the person who pointed it out. And of course, we will fix it. But, we're refraining right now from looking in detail at the criticisms till they come in the next couple of weeks through the public portal. And then, as we have promised, we will deal with every serious criticism seriously. And like good scientists, we will modify the report as might be warranted from those criticisms.
Steve Koonin, you've been fighting the alarmism for some time now. This is, I think, your weightiest blow against the scaremongering. So congratulations and thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you.